G'day guys, in this video I'm going to show you how to sort and organize your titles in Final Cut Pro. So I'm going to go through a few different methods. The first will just be how you can do it if you only have Final Cut Pro, and the second will be a little bit more detailed. It'll be for those that also have Motion on top of Final Cut Pro, and then we'll be looking at adding themes to titles as well as adding them into your own favorites folder and being able to organize them that way. So I've gone ahead and done this once already, but I'm going to delete everything and start again just to show you how you go through the process and a few different ways to speed it up. So the stuff we'll be going through in Motion is really basic and anyone can do it, because I found out how to do it just by playing around and I've never used Motion. So for those that know and understand Motion, this won't be a revelation at all, but hopefully this helps out some people that were sort of on the fence like me and weren't sure how to create themes for their titles. Now this can be helpful even if you have just the base titles in Final Cut Pro. You can sort them all out into a central location so they're easier to find. It can be even more helpful in my case, for example, where I have lots of third-party plugins from Motion VFX, but it could be Pixel Film Studios or any other third-party provider. Now where this issue presents itself the most is that a lot of these plugins offer very similar tools, but they're all spread out across the different plugin titles, and I constantly find myself going back to the same ones time and time again. But the more plugins you have, the longer the list is to go through, the harder it is to find, and everything just becomes a little bit too tedious. What I wanted to do was centralize all the ones that I go to all the time. Now the good thing about doing this through Motion is that you can create themes with your titles, and these themes will be customizable. You can create the theme, you can name them however you want, you can number them if you want them in a specific order, otherwise it will default to alphabetical order. To show you what I mean, I'll jump into Final Cut Pro. This obviously is Final Cut Pro. This is kind of the default view. Command Option 1 can bring up our titles. Now you can see in my particular instance I have a lot of titles, and the reason is all of these titles with the little m are from Motion VFX, which are third-party plugins that you can purchase, and I have quite a lot. So here's an example that I've already done, which I will be redoing for the purpose of this video. I'll go through and delete these, but the end goal here is that we have all of our titles in themes, segregated, so they're easy to find in the future, and you can name these themes whatever you like. You can chop and change at a later date just by opening the copy in Motion again, and obviously it just makes everything a little bit neater than it would otherwise be. If you have titles that you want to appear at the top, you can leave them unspecified and they all appear at the top, so they're easy to find in the future. If you're not happy with alphabetical orders, you can number things. Same way that I've put an underscore here, just to make sure this list appears up the top. So first things first, we'll go through and delete this. I've written everything down on paper, so I know how to find everything. Okay guys, so first up, I'm going to look at a method that you can do if you only have Final Cut Pro, if you don't have Apple Motion. It's a very basic method. You don't get full control, and some titles for some reason won't actually copy across this method, but I'll show you how to do it anyway, because if you don't have Motion, this is the only option that I'm aware of that you can do. So the first thing you need to do is go through all of your titles, test them out on a timeline, have a look at what things you can play around with, what parameters you can change, decide on your favorites, and write out a list of all of your favorites. Now before we make any changes, we're going to quit Final Cut Pro or close Final Cut Pro, Command Q. Now I have two Finder windows open here. To find all of your third-party titles, we'll go to Movies. This is a Mac OS file. This is not something I've created. Motion Templates, Titles. So anything that you alter or change or download from a third party will be here. If you don't have any third-party titles and you are only using the stock titles, you need to go into your applications, find Final Cut Pro, right-click, Show Package Contents, Plugins, Media Providers, Motion Effect, Contents, Resources, Templates, Titles. So here are all of your title categories. Inside will be the individual titles within those categories. Now the reason I've closed or quit Final Cut Pro is because you don't want to play around with this stuff and make a mistake with the app open. So pretending you don't have any third-party titles, so you can see the path down here. Now what we do over in this window where we have movies, motion templates, titles. This is my pre-existing one. We'll delete that and we'll create a new file with an underscore just to bring it to the top of the list. Open that. Now all of our titles that we want to move across, you'll notice how small they are. So there's no point dragging these out of position. Leave them in their position, leave them within the Final Cut Pro application. That way everything can receive updates and nothing will appear bug-wise. You can either Command-C, Command-V, or select the ones you want. This isn't my list of preferred titles, this is just an example. As you drag, you'll notice that that little arrow there, that is going to point to the original files. If you hold Option, you get a green plus. That means it is going to copy. So what we want to do is copy. All your titles are copied into your favorites folder. You haven't taken up much storage at all, so there's no dramas with copying everything. You want everything to keep working. Now we open Final Cut, have a look in our favorites folder, and here are all of those titles we dragged across. So using Final Cut only, you can drag all of your favorite titles across. Now you'll notice that they are segregated into different themes. These themes are pre-existing. We can't change that without Apple Motion, but what you can do is create more than one favorite folder. So Command Q, back to our two windows, and let's just pretend this is callouts. Command Shift N for a new folder, and pointers. Now let's pretend we have some pointers. Hold Option, drag, copied across. Open Final Cut Pro again. Command Control F, full screen. Now this way you can have all of your favorite callouts, all of your favorite pointers. Obviously these aren't pointers or callouts, just an example of what you can do without Motion VFX. One last thing to note, I'll just quit Final Cut Pro. Command Shift N, we have favorites, and we'll just delete these two for now. Same thing applies when we're taking from third party. Now the difference here is when you drag across, it will not create a pointer file, it will just move them. We don't want to do that. Hold Option to copy, because that way the original files are unbroken. The titles can receive updates and we can always copy them again later. One thing I have noticed, however, is that not everything will copy this way. For example, mcallout simple, let's pretend we have a few favorites in here, drag them across. mpointer miscellaneous 13, Option to copy, drag that across. But when we open Final Cut Pro now, we go into favorites, the existing themes are all there, the end slates are all there, the tools are all there. So all of these callouts, simple titles did not drag across, and the miscellaneous 13 did not drag across. Now I don't know, and I can't say why they haven't worked, but that is one downside to this system, is that it is not 100% foolproof. So if I had gone through 50 callout simple 2 titles, because I only wanted to use these 4, unfortunately that won't work with this method, but it will work with the motion method. This miscellaneous 13 also has not copied across into our favorites folder, but the backgrounds worked, the end slates worked, the tools worked, and these tools also work out of their theme. You can drag them individually and they also work, which we can prove. We'll grab these 3 tools and we'll move them out. We'll delete the tools folder, empty the bin. You can see the tools work. It's not about the parent folder that makes them work, but for some reason, some plugins just won't work this way. Because this was just an example, I'm going to go ahead and delete all of that. So there you can see you have some customizability, but some plugins won't actually copy across and they won't actually appear in your favorites folder. Others will with their pre-existing themes, but you can't reorganize and rename these themes. You can create more folders and organize everything that way. So all of your callouts are in one location, all of your pointers are in one location, but you can't have one master folder for titles with all of the themes customizable. The way we'll look at it next is through Apple Motion, and this way you have full customization over your titles, and you can even change things you don't like about the titles. So in the future, all you have to do is put that title into the timeline and that's job done. Let's start in Final Cut. So with this method, we can leave Final Cut open. So to do this, we can open the title in Motion if there is an existing theme that you already like the name of. For example, transitions, video thumbnails, titles, tools. If you want to reuse those themes, you can just by right clicking and opening in Motion. But what I'm going to do is make some custom themes here. So everything is fully customized by us. Just going to spell Motion correctly and then try and open it. Here we go. Final Cut title. We are just creating a blank. The presets don't matter. Okay, so now we have Motion. This window does not matter so much. Everything is going to be auto-generated through Motion. So we don't need to touch this now, but we'll leave it open because we will have a look at our favorites folder. Now in Motion, this is just a blank title. If we go to save this, Shift Command S to save as. So we'll call this backgrounds template, and this title will get deleted. We're only creating this to create a theme. You might have none and then new theme. If you haven't opened any titles recently in Motion, this will be blank, but you can see it's remembered some of the recent themes that I've used. So you would go new theme, and this would be backgrounds, create the theme, make sure your category is correct, and then we publish. Now if we jump back into Final Cut Pro, in favorites, we have a theme with our title that will get deleted. If we jump in our folder here, you can see that they've automatically generated this folder here, and this contains our title template. So that is all automated now. We don't need to change that. Now the next step from the list that you've written down previously is that you go through all of your favorite backgrounds. For example, this one, right click, open in Motion. Now this is that file in Motion. For this particular title, I'm happy with it exactly the way it is. Have your project selected. We go to Inspector, Properties, and here you will find Theme. This one already has the theme backgrounds. As we can see here, it is under the theme backgrounds, so it will perfectly match up with our desired theme. So you want Inspector, you want the project selected, and then you want Properties. Now you can press Command Shift S to save as, or Command S for me brings up this window here. Do not save original, save as duplicate. That will leave this title in its proper folder that is created through Motion VFX, and that will be able to receive updates. We only want to save as a duplicate. Now you can name these titles whatever you want. I like to give them the same name as the original because that way it is easier to find where they came from. Make sure your category is set to the favorites, and we've got backgrounds. Jump into Final Cut Pro and draft paper appears there. So that's the simplest example. This one is already themed the way we wanted it, so we didn't actually have to change the theme. Now let's go to another theme. So again, I'll create a blank title. I will Command Shift S, save as. This title will be a template for the theme lists. It'll be in favorites. The theme will be a new theme. Ordinarily, I've already got one created there called lists. So ordinarily you'd go new theme, type this out and publish. Now our new theme has presented itself. So this theme does not exist in the plugins that I wanted to take from. They're actually called different things. So just as an example, packing list, right click, open in Motion. So this is the title in its original form. Make sure your project is selected. Go to Inspector, Properties. Here we have our themes. It's under miscellaneous. Here we want to move it to lists. Command Shift S or even Command S in this instance, saving a duplicate, not the original. I'm not sure why the category defaults to that. We want favorites. The theme has already been set because we selected it here. Publish. And there we have our packing list and draft paper. Now let's go through the absolute quickest way to do this. We'll find another one in lists, for example. I wrote out my favorites, so I'm just going to find the one that I had. This was in my favorites, open in Motion. Once it's open in Motion, Command S, save as duplicate. So what this does is saves us having to select project, layers, inspector, properties, and go through all this. As soon as it's open, if you press Command S, it will warn you that once you save this file, it cannot be opened by previous versions of Motion, but all we're looking for here is the option to save as duplicate. Because we can change the theme here, this is a lot quicker than opening it, selecting project, inspector, properties, themes. Okay, one more time, just for good luck. Command N in Motion will create a new title, selecting Final Cut title, open. Command S, just to create the theme travel. It'll be in favorites. Now, obviously I've already done this, but pretending I hadn't done this, we will go new theme, travel. And then Final Cut Pro creates a new theme for you. So mtravel 2, city road, open in motion, Command S, save as duplicate, name, category, theme, publish, jump into Final Cut, favorites, and there it is. Okay, so that's basically it. If you have some titles that you use all the time, the best thing to do is to not give them a category whatsoever. For example, mtutorial 2, title number 8, I want to appear at the top because I really like this one. It doesn't take up the whole screen and it allows me to list things on the side of the screen. Open in motion. Now the theme, what I'm doing here is removing the theme because in mtutorials it is already themed under titles. I want this to appear at the top. I select none, in favorites, publish, jump across to Final Cut, favorites. There we go. That took a while for Final Cut, but there it is at the top. So if you fill this out with lots of different themes, you can have your favorites of your favorites at the top by giving them no theme whatsoever. Alright, so what I'm going to show you now is just how to make a few small edits. Now, I don't really know how to use motion, so if you're familiar with motion, you can do a lot more than I can do, but this is just an example for those people that aren't really familiar, that want to make a few little changes. One of my most used titles is mintro 30. Now, I normally pair this with a sound, but we can't actually pair sounds in motion and have them translate into Final Cut Pro, as far as I can tell. So this is the support documents from Apple. It says audio file saved in motion template will not be available in Final Cut Pro. That is extremely annoying and disappointing to see, but that is the case as far as I can tell. That's just the way it is. But there are some other little changes that I want to make. Firstly, option click to move the playhead there. I do not want this to be on logo, I want it to be on text. The other thing I dislike is the size of the text. I normally go for about 160 or thereabouts. So what I want to do with this title when I save it into my favorites is have those two changes already made. Open in motion, and here we have the project, the inspector, and here is all the parameters that it will be published with. What we want to do is change this to text and change the size of the text to something that I'm happier with. If your titles always started the same way, you could add title in here, hurty. You could change the colors of the background and the text. You can get it to look exactly how you want it to look, and then it will immediately look that way when you put it in the timeline next time, because it won't default to these parameters. It will be saved as your published parameters here. I'm going to do that, save as duplicate. Again, I give it all the same name so I know where to find it again if I stuff something up. Now I'm choosing no theme for this because I want it to appear at the top, and there we have two that I commonly use. Another example of a title I use quite frequently that I want to change the defaults on is frame 1, which appears like this. I like it to appear like this, somewhere in the corner. Easy enough to do. Open in motion, select the project, the inspector project. What we're going to look at here is making this appear where we want it to appear. So it will resemble the final product here. So first things first, I'll just change the scale, and then I will drag it into position. This I normally find too large, so I'll drop that. And some of the text, I normally like to make them a little bit bigger. And that should do it there. Save as duplicate, frame 1. Favorites. Now I don't want any theme for this one because I want it to appear up the top. So there it is there. We drop it down there and we can see it appears up the top like the last one did. So I'm going to go ahead and finish off the favorites the way that I want them to appear. Then we'll have a quick look through it. Now with this method, the best thing is that all the parameters that you normally change. If you have a favorite title that you always use, you have to drag it on the timeline and you always go through the same parameters. Maybe it comes up in the center, you want it in the bottom left. Maybe the text is too thin, so you're always making the text bigger, or you want to add the background. For some reason that checkbox is unticked for the background, but you always end up checking it because you want the background. You want to change the opacity on the background. Basically, any of the changeable parameters that Motion VFX or Pixel Film Studios or whoever it is has built into the title, you can go ahead and change the publishing parameters for the duplicate that you save. You change them in Motion VFX, you save it, and then every time you go to put it in your timeline, it will go into the timeline with those parameters exactly how you want it. So that to me is the biggest benefit. I love setting the themes and having everything in the one folder now, but the most time consuming part for me is changing those parameters every time I go to drop it in to the timeline. Now it's all saved exactly how I want it. I can drag them in, drop them in the timeline, and it just saves me a lot of time. Okay, so that took a long time, but I am finished and everything was done through Motion. I've renamed the file and you can see Motion automatically files things together through the theme. So I haven't created these files and placed them in there. They've been placed in there through Motion theme selection. So now we have finalized everything and you can see the unthemed stuff at the top. These are ones I'll use most frequently, and then the rest is just alphabetical order. If I wanted to change it, I could number them, but I'm pretty happy with that just being alphabetical and grouping everything into themes. Now I should never have to stray too far from this one tab. I'll get accustomed to where everything is. I can thin a lot of this out as I realise which titles I use and which ones I don't. For now, this is a starting point. I expect this to get smaller as I keep editing and changing things around. For example, I won't use all of these M callouts. I will probably find 3 that I like to use the most, and then I'll get rid of the rest. But it stops me searching through the 50 in here to find something that I like. Now there are some things I do use which I haven't actually placed into the favorites folder. Things like M callout specs. Because it is such a specific plugin, there is no need for me to select these in favorites, because depending on what spec it is, it will depend on when and how often I use it. But because it's grouped so well, I don't need to move it elsewhere. The problem is when you come to things like pointers, you have pointers here, pointers in here, pointers in here, you have pointers in here. Most of these plugins tend to have some form of pointer or magnification or zoom, and that's where it gets a bit tedious scrolling in between them all and trying to find the ones that you wanted to add. So with the favorites, I have the focus group. These are my favorites to use, the ones that give the best customization, and they're the ones I will stick to. There are other things such as mTitle Cinematic, mTitle Cinematic 2. So these again, they're grouped very well and they're very specific in what they do, but I didn't want to go through and pick out my favorites at the moment as I did with callouts. Everything from mTracker 3D and all the associated plugins will stay there. I'm not going to pull anything because that is quite easy to find and they serve a specific purpose. And that is basically it. Now, another thing to note is you can assign 2 titles to defaults. You can make a default title and a default lower third. So Control T for default. That for me is just this basic one that actually comes packaged with Final Cut Pro. The reason I like this one is that I can drag it to wherever. It tells me when it's in the center of the screen and I can just click on the screen to type quick corrections, good spelling. And the other one I use all the time, which I've chosen to be my default lower third, is this one here, mTutorial Zoom. I use it all the time. I have it signed to Control-Shift-T and that is the default lower third. So because I use that all the time, that is assigned there and I haven't moved it into here. So I've gone ahead and changed the majority of these. I've changed that size. I've changed that to text. I've made it smaller. I've raised that list. I've moved these backgrounds to the side. I've changed the widths and the backgrounds on all of these so they appear with backgrounds instead of without. Whereas before they were appearing without backgrounds, now they have an opaque background. So I've gone through, spent my time, I've made an alteration to about 80% of these. So as I drop them on the footage, they actually appear how I want them to. For example, this one is now black background with white writing. System shortcuts, I made the text easier to read and I made it larger, and I moved it from the center of the screen to the bottom left corner. These measurements, I went through and changed all the colors. I changed everything to millimeters from feet because that is useless. Same again with the weight. I've put the bars on the background there so it's easy to read. Changed it to kilograms, things like this. I've changed from 72 and 78 Fahrenheit. I've put it to degrees Celsius, and just little things that I found myself doing repeatedly. I've made the changes once in Motion and saved it, and now I don't have to go back to it and change it again. These templates I made at the start when I was trying to show you how to create a theme, they are just placeholders. They can be deleted now. The theme has been created. We don't need them. So if we find out where they all are by searching template, we've got backgrounds, lists, and travel. So we can go back to our files. We can find all the templates, backgrounds, lists, and travel. Command delete. Now we have to quit Final Cut Pro for it to register these changes. Now those templates have been deleted, that is basically all we can do. As you can see with Motion VFX, you can have one folder of all your favorites. You can create themes, you can name them whatever you want. You can change all the publishable parameters the same as you would in Final Cut Pro, but you can save them so they become the default. If you're good at Motion VFX, you can play around with it even further, obviously, using the third-party titles as a starting point and just adjusting it to whatever you want. So I personally would really like to be able to attach sound to things in Motion and have them transfer across when we put it into Final Cut Pro. That is a really annoying bottleneck. So this took me a few hours to write out all the lists and all the themes and go through changing all the publishable parameters and all that sort of stuff, but in the future, it'll just make everything so much smoother. Hopefully all the time that I've spent here is an investment that pays itself back as I save time in the future by just being able to drag these titles into the timeline from the browser and not having to play with them again. So you can see my favorites folder is a little bit large at the moment. I do plan on trimming it down, not by a lot. I normally edit with the browser on a separate display, so it doesn't look as cluttered as it did in the screen recordings, because normally the browser is in a completely different display. I can actually see most of those titles at once, and I've got a pretty good idea of where everything is now without having to go looking for things elsewhere. If this is something that's really important to you and you want to go through and change all these titles, the good news is that Motion is nowhere near as expensive as Final Cut Pro is, so it's not going to hurt you too much to go out and buy Motion if this is something that's really important, is having full control over your favorite titles. For me personally, if Motion was its own plugin that allowed me to save defaults of all my favorite titles, I would have paid the $70 odd that it costs. It's actually less than what most of these Motion VFX plugins will charge you, and it has a lot more flexibility to it. Now, if you want to change any more parameters on your favorites titles, you just right click, open in Motion, and this time you just press Command S. You're already editing a duplicate. You don't need to create another duplicate. The duplicate is fine. The original title is still located in its spot. It's still ready to be updated if that is ever the case. Okay, hopefully that was helpful and it saves you some time in the future. It has definitely helped me. To be honest, I can't believe it took me this long to get around to doing it. It's something I always wanted to do, but I just kept putting it off and putting it off. I'm glad it's done now because that is the only time I'll have to do it for a very long time. Alright, that's it. Thanks for watching. See you on the next one. Need to go to the first lots of different plugins. So for me, board but you always check it. Effects you can play with it. The future, thanks to all this, pays back future through the lack of future, thanks to all this. Fuck, I can't get this one out. Over your favourite titles. Oh, a little scratch there.